The cheapest MacBook starts at $1,000 and that's a lot of money. And you definitely don't want to damage it, cover it in scratches, or yeah. Moving on, a scratch and dent-free MacBook looks good, but keeping your MacBook in good condition is also important, as I covered in a previous video, because the resale value of Macs is really high, depending of course on their condition. Now, is a protective shell for your MacBook essential? In my opinion, actually no. I've personally used MacBooks for almost 10 years and have never used a case. Sure, I've had a few minor drops and the bottom gets a bit scuffed, but they all survived. However, if you're a bit clumsy or you want your laptop in perfect condition when it's time to sell, a cheap Amazon case might just be the answer. I came across the ProCase on Amazon one day, which is a heavy duty but still relatively slim case that fits both the M1 MacBook Air and the MacBook Pro. It also works on previous versions of the MacBook, but just make sure you check the description of the Amazon page to double check. The feature that really drew my attention was the fold kickstand on the bottom. More on this later. Now, getting the case onto my M1 MacBook Air was simple enough. Just line it up and clip the little plastic clips on the edges over the chassis of the MacBook. The clips seemed flimsy at first and I was worried about breaking them, but they've been designed in such a way that they're really tiny, so there's less chance of them snapping. Let's jump into the studio and take a closer look at this case, as well as discuss some negatives that I don't like. Okay, so let's start with some positives and some things that I really like about this case. So the first one is you get really, really good coverage and protection. So this entire part here is plastic. So is the bottom. There's really not much that you can scratch or get past this cover. On the edges and the corners, you get this really thick sort of plastic on the sides. On the other side as well, on the corner. If I flip it over, you can see both corners here, this really, really thick plastic. So if you drop it, this is going to be the first thing that hits. It isn't super, super thick here, but as you can see here, you get a little bit of overhang on the corner. So hopefully that's going to be enough if you do ever drop it. A lot of the times what I see with MacBooks is you get a lot of scratches on the bottom aluminum case. And that's obviously just from normal wear and tear, and it's something you can't really avoid unless you have some kind of protective cover like this or some kind of skin. So as a good example, here's a 2017 MacBook Pro. You can see there's quite a lot of scuffing on the underside. It's really not that bad. And a previous MacBook I had, I actually dropped it on the ground right on the corner here, and there was a huge sort of dent in the corner. It was just cosmetic, didn't actually do anything to the Mac, and I was still able to sell it. But I got really, really lucky there. So this particular case will protect against things like that. So flipping it over and opening up the lid, you can see here on the trackpad, near the trackpad, it's actually quite flush with the trackpad. So you don't actually get any clips or anything kind of sticking out. And that's really great because when you're actually typing on the keyboard, it's not actually digging into your wrists like that. So this is very, very comfortable. I can't actually feel anything. You do have the little clips right here, but they're so small and they're so sort of flush with the case that you just can't feel it at all, which is really, really comfortable. So like I said before, this case is going to be really, really good for protecting against scratches. Now in terms of actual fall damage, now if this thing falls to the ground and the ground's like cement or metal or wood or something really, really hard, I'm not really convinced that this is going to do a lot to save it. So as you can see on this corner, for example, you've really only got a little bit of plastic that's kind of separating the MacBook from whatever's hitting the ground. These corners are a little bit more well protected. But if you drop your MacBook on something really, really solid, it's not really going to matter that you have this case because the fall damage is going to be huge and you're probably actually going to bend or have a massive dent in the actual MacBook. Now, in saying that, I would much rather have this case on when dropping the Mac than not, because at the very least, it's going to give you a little bit of separation and a little bit of cushioning if you do hit something hard, or if the laptop, for example, falls off your desk onto a really solid floor. Now, the fold-out kickstand is actually something that I really, really like for two reasons. So number one, it actually lifts your laptop a little bit off the desk or the table or whatever you're using it on, and it provides sort of a tilt for your wrists. So it's a lot comfortable to type like this rather than having the Mac flat on the ground, because it kind of lets you angle your wrists up, and it's a much more natural position for your hands to be in. The other thing I like about it is just so easy to flick them down. You can see right there, they're down now. Just one finger, it's in, and then you can just pull it back out again if you so wish. Now the website claims that this particular kickstand is actually going to reduce heat because obviously you have this extra airflow going underneath that. I tend to disagree with that. If it does have any kind of impact, it's going to be very minimal, as I've already proven in this particular video here. You can see in that particular video, I used a laptop cooling stand and it really didn't make much difference at all. Now you may be able to see here that the actual case extends a little bit over the vent. Now I don't think this is going to have any kind of noticeable impact. Obviously not on the MacBook Air, the M1 MacBook Air, because it does not have a fan. But on some of the Pro models, having this all the way back, it might constrict air very, very slightly. But I don't think that's going to be a major issue at all. Another quick thing is that it sits completely flat. So right now I have the kickstand open. You can see there's no wobble. And when I shut this, there's no wobble either. So it's very, very well made and solid. And you have each of the 4 points connecting the Mac to the surface are even. So there's no wobble at all. You also get a large cutout on the sides for any kind of ports or thick cables. Some cases just have like a tiny little cutout and it just doesn't work very well at all, especially if you have a more bulky kind of cable. And last but not least, in terms of the pros, the price. So it's only 30 bucks. If you do scratch it or if you do drop your laptop and you crack the case, you just buy a new one for 30 bucks and it's a lot better than having to repair your MacBook or get a couple $100 less when you go to sell it in a couple of years' time, because the whole thing is just completely scratched and full of dents. Now moving on to the negatives, these are all actually relatively minor. I really did struggle finding negatives for this particular case, which was surprising to me because it is pretty cheap. The first one is this particular top cover here, where it actually meets the lid. Doesn't really have the best sort of attachment point. You can see there I can actually lift it up a little bit. So in practice, when you're actually lifting up the MacBook lid, it can feel a little bit strange because this kind of moves up, but I haven't really had any issues with it so far. You do have these 2 clips on the side which are holding it in, so I don't really think that's a huge issue, and it isn't for me personally. Now staying with the top case, I did notice that you can't push the screen all the way back and get that maximum degree of viewing angle with this particular case, just because obviously these 2 sections here overlap, as you can see there. I really didn't notice a huge deal though. You may be only missing out on a few degrees of viewing angle, and most of the time you're not going to be using your laptop like this, but it's honestly not a big issue at all. You maybe miss out on just a slight little bit of adjustment. Now this next con is not specific to this particular case, it's all cases. Sometimes you will be able to get dust and maybe bits of sand, depending on where you live, in between the actual case and the chassis of the MacBook, particularly underneath the MacBook where you have these little gaps. And if bits of sand and dust get in there, it may cause a tendency to have some small, very minor scuffing or scratching as the case rubs against that dust or sand. This is going to be very, very minor and it's not going to be a huge deal, but I do recommend taking your laptop out of the case every few months and giving it a blast with some compressed air, or just giving it a clean and a wipe down, just to get all that dust and sand and lint and whatever else out of there, so you don't run the very small risk, admittedly, of scratching the metal chassis. Speaking of scratches, the top lid can be somewhat easy to scratch. You can see here I've already got a little scratch on the top when I rubbed it against some metal before. It's not super noticeable, and if I kind of scratch it with my fingernails, not really that bad. It's mainly going to be against solid, things like metal pens or metal objects that are going to scratch it and cause that marking. But stuff like fingernails, not really any issues. So I would say it's relatively sturdy. And at the end of the day, if something's going to scratch the top of your MacBook, better to be the plastic case than the metal chassis. Now, the last negative for me is the cutout on the side. Now, this is going to actually rule you out from quite a few USB-C and Thunderbolt hubs. So it's mainly going to be the hubs that actually attach onto the side of your MacBook. They are not going to fit. So the only hubs that are going to work with this are ones that attach via a cable, such as this particular anchor hub, which I've reviewed in a previous video. You can see that fits perfectly fine. But if this was one of those hubs that actually attached like that, it would not fit at all, because obviously you have the overhang from the case. Anyway guys, thanks for watching this video. Let me know in the comments section what you think of this case or just cases in general. Like I said before, I personally don't use them. I like to enjoy my MacBooks in all of their naked metallic glory, but I'm curious to hear your thoughts. Anyway, thanks for watching and I'll catch you in the next one.